You've probably noticed something strange happening. The music that once moved you to tears now sounds empty, almost irritating. The movies you used to watch on repeat feel unbearable to sit through. The shows everyone's talking about, the ones that captivate millions, leave you feeling hollow and restless. And you wonder quietly, in the privacy of your own mind, what's wrong with you. Why can't you just enjoy things anymore? Why does entertainment that once brought you such pleasure now feel like a prison you're desperate to escape? If you're experiencing this, welcome to Alan Watts Insights, and please subscribe, because what you're going through isn't depression, and you're not broken. You're awakening. And what you're feeling is one of the most misunderstood, rarely discussed aspects of spiritual transformation. Let me paint you a picture. You sit down to watch a movie, perhaps one of those blockbuster films everyone's raving about. The music swells dramatically. The hero faces impossible odds. The villain delivers menacing monologues. And where once you would have been swept away by the narrative, transported into another world, now you sit there acutely aware of every manipulative technique being used. You see the formula. You feel the strings being pulled. You recognize the psychological engineering designed to trigger your emotions, and instead of losing yourself in the story, you feel trapped by it. The experience isn't entertainment anymore. It's exposure. You're watching the machinery of cultural conditioning operate in real time, and you can't unsee it. Or maybe it's music. That song you played 1,000 times, the one that defined a chapter of your life, comes on, and you feel nothing. Worse than nothing. You feel a kind of cognitive dissonance, an uncomfortable awareness that the emotions being sold to you through carefully calculated chord progressions and frequency manipulation feel artificial, manufactured. The lyrics that once seemed profound now sound childish, repetitive, designed to keep you circling the same shallow emotional territory without ever touching anything real. And you turn it off, sitting in silence, wondering if you've lost your ability to feel joy altogether. Here's what nobody tells you about spiritual awakening. It doesn't just change what you believe. It changes how your brain processes reality itself. Neuroscientific research has shown that meditation and spiritual practices literally rewire the default mode network, the part of your brain responsible for self-referential thinking, narrative processing, and emotional engagement with stories. When this network quiets, when consciousness expands beyond the habitual patterns of thinking and feeling, entertainment designed to capture a wandering mind loses its grip. You see, most movies, most music, most television shows are engineered to speak to a consciousness that's still trapped in dualistic thinking, still identified with the ego's endless drama of wanting and fearing, winning and losing, being accepted or rejected. But when you wake up, even just a little, you begin to operate from a different level of awareness. And suddenly, the hero's journey doesn't resonate anymore because you've realized there's no separate hero. The romantic fulfillment narrative feels hollow because you've glimpsed that wholeness doesn't come from another person. The revenge plot, the redemption arc, the triumph over evil, all of it starts to feel like an elaborate distraction from what's actually true. You're not watching entertainment anymore. You're watching a very expensive, very sophisticated cultural hypnosis machine, and you've accidentally woken up in the middle of the show. Alan Watts spoke often about this phenomenon, though he addressed it in broader terms. He taught that society uses entertainment as what he called controlled distraction, a socially sanctioned escape from existential awareness. Think about what that means. We live in a world that's terrified of silence, terrified of stillness, terrified of people sitting alone with their own consciousness for too long. Why? Because when you stop distracting yourself, when you stop consuming the endless stream of narratives and stimulation, you might start asking dangerous questions. Questions like, what am I actually doing with my life? What do I truly value? Is this how I want to spend my brief time on Earth? These questions threaten the entire structure of a consumer society that depends on keeping people unconscious, distracted, forever chasing the next source of stimulation. Watts described popular culture as a game of black and white, a simplified moral universe where good battles evil, heroes save the day, and problems have solutions. These stories keep consciousness trapped in dualistic thinking, in the illusion that reality operates according to simple binaries. But awakening reveals something far more nuanced, far more paradoxical. You begin to see that hero and villain are roles, not identities. That good and evil exist on a spectrum of consciousness, not as opposing forces. That the whole dramatic structure of conflict and resolution is a mental construct, not an inherent feature of reality. And once you see this, once you truly understand it, watching another superhero movie becomes almost painful, not because it's badly made, but because it's reinforcing the very illusions you're trying to wake up from. Now, let me be very clear about something. This loss of interest in entertainment often gets confused with clinical depression, and that's a dangerous misunderstanding. In Buddhist psychology, there's a term for what you're experiencing, nibbida. It means disenchantment or disillusionment, and it's recognized as a necessary stage of spiritual development, not a problem to be fixed, but a sign of progress. The Buddha taught that there are two kinds of pleasure. There's kama sukha, pleasure derived from sensory experience, from external stimulation. And there's dhamma sukha, pleasure that arises from truth itself, from alignment with reality as it actually is. What you're experiencing isn't the loss of your capacity for joy. It's the dissolution of one kind of pleasure in preparation for something deeper, something that doesn't depend on constant stimulation and distraction. But here's where it gets difficult. You're living in a world where everyone around you is still deeply engaged with the very entertainment you can no longer stomach. They're discussing the latest series, debating plot twists, forming their identities around fandoms and cultural references. And you sit there feeling like an alien, unable to participate, unable to care. The isolation this creates is profound. You can't explain to people that you've become sensitized to the manipulation inherent in modern entertainment without sounding arrogant or mentally unstable. You can't tell them that watching television now feels like volunteering for consciousness sedation without seeming judgmental of their choices. So you stay quiet, and the gap between you and others widens, and you wonder if you're the one with the problem. Let me tell you what's actually happening in your brain. Modern neuroscience has discovered that spiritual practices don't just make you feel calmer or more centered. They change the actual structure and function of your brain, the default mode network, which is most active when your mind is wandering, when you're lost in thought, when you're engaging with narratives and stories, begins to show reduced activity in experienced meditators. This network is what allows you to get absorbed in a movie, to forget yourself in a song, to lose hours scrolling through social media. When it quiets, you don't lose yourself as easily. You remain present, aware, watching from a place that isn't completely identified with the content of experience. And here's the thing about modern entertainment. It's specifically designed to capture a wandering mind, to provide constant novelty, to trigger dopamine release through unpredictable rewards. Streaming platforms use artificial intelligence to study your viewing patterns and serve you content engineered to maximize engagement. Music producers use frequency analysis to craft songs that hit your brain's reward centers with surgical precision. Social media algorithms create infinite scroll mechanisms that exploit your neurological vulnerability to intermittent reinforcement. The entire entertainment industrial complex has become a sophisticated system for hijacking human attention and keeping it captive. When your consciousness begins to wake up, when your default mode network quiets and your awareness expands, you become acutely sensitive to these manipulation mechanisms. You don't experience a Netflix series as entertainment anymore. You experience it as an attempt to capture your consciousness, to keep you in a passive, receptive state where you're consuming narratives rather than living your own life. You don't hear a pop song as music anymore. You hear it as a carefully engineered product designed to create artificial emotional states that keep you dependent on external stimulation. You don't see social media as connection anymore. You see it as attention theft, as the monetization of human consciousness itself. Carl Jung had profound insights into this phenomenon, though he was observing a much less technologically sophisticated form of mass media. Jung described the process of individuation, the journey of becoming a unique individual, rather than just another expression of collective psychology. He taught that the collective unconscious, the shared psychological patterns that influence entire cultures, often works against individuation. The entertainment industry, in Jung's framework, serves the collective, not the individual. It reinforces archetypal patterns, keeps people thinking in familiar grooves, prevents the kind of psychological differentiation that real awakening requires. When you're going through individuation, when you're separating your consciousness from the collective patterns that once defined you, popular entertainment starts to feel foreign. Not because you're superior to others, but because you're operating from a different psychological structure. You're no longer looking for stories that reinforce your ego's preferred narratives. You're not seeking validation of your beliefs or distraction from uncomfortable truths. You're drawn toward depth, toward authenticity, toward content that challenges rather than comforts, that questions rather than confirms. And most mainstream entertainment simply doesn't serve that hunger. Now, here's where I want to address something crucial. The fear that you'll never enjoy anything again, that you've permanently lost your capacity for pleasure. This fear is natural, but it's based on a misunderstanding of what's actually happening. Yes, you can't go back to unconscious consumption of entertainment. That door has closed, but what's opening is far more interesting. You're developing the capacity for a different kind of engagement with art and beauty and creativity. You're becoming able to appreciate things for what they actually are rather than what they promise to make you feel. You're cultivating discernment, the ability to distinguish between entertainment that numbs and art that awakens, between distraction and genuine inspiration. Research on spiritual transformation shows that this phase of anhedonia, this feeling of joylessness, typically lasts anywhere from 3 to 18 months. It's a transitional period where your old sources of pleasure have fallen away, but new ones haven't fully emerged yet. It's uncomfortable, often deeply so, but it's temporary. What emerges on the other side is a more mature relationship with entertainment and culture. You stop needing constant stimulation. You become capable of sitting in silence without discomfort. And when you do engage with movies or music, you do so consciously, choosing things that genuinely resonate with your expanded awareness, rather than defaulting to whatever algorithms tell you to consume. Let me tell you what this looks like in practice. You might find yourself drawn to films that previous versions of you would have found boring. Slow cinema, contemplative documentaries, movies that sit with silence and ambiguity rather than racing toward resolution. You might discover music that doesn't manipulate your emotions, but creates space for whatever you're actually feeling. Ambient compositions, traditional spiritual music, sounds that support presence rather than demanding attention. You might realize that you've become far more selective, watching one deeply meaningful film a month instead of binge-watching entire series, listening to a single album repeatedly instead of sampling thousands of songs. And here's the paradox. In losing your ability to consume entertainment unconsciously, you gain something far more valuable. You reclaim your attention. You reclaim your time. You reclaim your consciousness itself. Think about how many hours you spent absorbed in entertainment that left no lasting impression, that served only to fill time, to avoid boredom, to distract you from discomfort or difficult questions. Think about how much of your life was spent consuming other people's creative visions instead of developing your own. The loss you're feeling isn't really a loss. It's a liberation disguised as deprivation. Alan Watts had a beautiful way of describing this shift. He talked about the difference between looking at a menu and eating a meal. Entertainment, he suggested, is often like endlessly reading menus, getting excited about descriptions of food, but never actually eating. We mistake the representation for the reality, the symbol for the thing itself. Movies show us love, adventure, meaning, transformation, but they're not actually giving us those experiences. They're giving us simulation, substitution. And when you wake up, you start to crave the meal, not the menu. You want to live your own life with full intensity, not watch fictional representations of life lived by characters who don't exist. This is why awakened people often feel such discomfort around passive entertainment consumption. It's not moral superiority, it's not elitism. It's a genuine, visceral sense that life is short, consciousness is precious, and every hour spent in passive absorption of narratives is an hour not spent in direct engagement with reality itself. When you've tasted even a moment of true presence, of awareness without the constant mental commentary, of existence without the need for stimulation and distraction, going back to unconscious entertainment consumption feels like choosing sleep over waking life. But let's talk about the social dimension of this, because that's often where the pain is sharpest. Human beings are deeply social creatures. We bond over shared cultural references, over discussing movies and music, over the common language that entertainment provides. When you lose interest in mainstream entertainment, you lose access to a primary form of social connection in modern culture. People gather to watch sports, to discuss series, to attend concerts. If these things no longer interest you, how do you connect? How do you relate to people who are still deeply embedded in entertainment culture? This is one of the loneliest aspects of awakening. You're not trying to be different. You're not trying to be difficult. You genuinely cannot force yourself to care about things that once mattered to you. And people can sense this. They can feel that you're no longer participating in the collective trance, and it makes them uncomfortable. Sometimes they respond with concern, asking if you're depressed. Sometimes with irritation, accusing you of being judgmental. Sometimes with distance, simply moving toward others who still speak the shared language of popular culture. You have to find your people, the ones who are also waking up, who understand why binge watching no longer appeals, why social media feels toxic, why the music that tops the charts sounds hollow. These people exist, though they're harder to find because they're not congregating in the obvious places. They're in meditation circles, philosophy groups, creative communities focused on authentic expression rather than commercial success. They're reading books, taking walks, having long conversations about ideas rather than entertainment. They're building lives around depth rather than distraction. And here's what you need to understand about this transition. You're not losing the ability to enjoy life. You're losing the ability to enjoy substitutes for life. You're becoming unwilling to accept simulation when reality is available. You're developing a palate that can taste the difference between artificial flavoring and real food, between manufactured emotion and genuine feeling. This is evolution, not pathology. Your consciousness is developing, and like any developmental process, it involves leaving behind what no longer serves you. The entertainment industry understands something profound about human psychology. It understands that people will pay money, spend time, give attention to anything that helps them avoid being alone with themselves. Every advance in entertainment technology, from radio to television to streaming to virtual reality, has been about creating more sophisticated, more immersive, more convincing alternatives to direct experience. And it works because most people are uncomfortable with silence, with solitude, with the naked reality of their own existence, without constant narrative and stimulation. But awakening is fundamentally about becoming comfortable with what is, without needing it to be different, without needing constant distraction from discomfort. It's about developing the capacity to sit with yourself, with reality as it actually is, without reaching for entertainment to numb or distract or stimulate. And once you develop this capacity, entertainment loses much of its appeal because you're no longer running from what it was designed to help you avoid. In Buddhist teaching, there's a recognition that the spiritual path involves a gradual letting go of what are called sense, door pleasures, experiences that depend on external stimulation. This isn't about becoming joyless or ascetic. It's about discovering that the deepest forms of contentment don't come from what you consume or experience, but from the quality of your consciousness itself. A mind that's present, clear, undistracted is inherently more satisfying than any entertainment could ever be. Not because presence is exciting or stimulating, but because it's real. And after enough time faking it through entertainment consumption, real starts to become more valuable than exciting. Now, I want to address something important. Some of you might be thinking, does this mean I can never watch movies again? Do I have to give up music forever? Am I supposed to just sit in silence for the rest of my life? No. What changes isn't whether you engage with entertainment, but how and why you engage with it. You move from unconscious consumption to conscious engagement. You stop using entertainment as escape and start approaching it as one of many ways to experience beauty, creativity, and human expression. You become far more selective, far more intentional, far more aware of what you're actually receiving from the experience. There are films that awaken consciousness rather than sedate it, music that creates space for presence rather than hijacking attention. Art that deepens your relationship with reality rather than replacing it with fantasy. The question isn't whether to engage with culture, but how to do so from a place of awareness rather than addiction, from choice rather than compulsion, from genuine appreciation rather than desperate need for stimulation. What you're experiencing right now, this uncomfortable in-between place where old pleasures have fallen away, but new ones haven't fully emerged, is a sacred passage. It's the void that appears between one way of being and another, and the temptation in this void is enormous. The temptation to believe you've made a mistake, that awakening was the wrong path, that you should somehow force yourself back into unconscious consumption so you can at least fit in, so you can at least connect with others in familiar ways, so you can at least escape the discomfort of being fully present with what is. But you can't go back. Consciousness doesn't work in reverse. Once you've seen the machinery, you can't unsee it. Once you've tasted presence, distraction loses its appeal. The only way through this passage is forward, into deeper acceptance of what's actually happening, into greater trust that your consciousness knows where it's going even when your personality feels lost and confused. And here's what waits on the other side. A life lived with far more intention, far less time wasted, far more direct engagement with reality itself. Relationships that go deeper because you're not bonding over shared entertainment consumption, but over genuine presence with each other. Creative expression that emerges from your own consciousness rather than being borrowed from fictional characters. A quality of attention that allows you to see beauty in ordinary moments that entertainment, addicted consciousness completely misses. These aren't small things. These are the substance of a life actually lived rather than observed through screens. So, if you're sitting there wondering what's wrong with you, wondering why you can't just be normal, wondering if you've permanently damaged your capacity for joy, hear this. You haven't lost anything essential. You've gained something that makes the old pleasures obsolete. You've developed consciousness that can no longer be satisfied with substitutes, simulations, distractions. And yes, this is lonely sometimes. Yes, this is uncomfortable. Yes, this makes you different from most people around you. But it's also real. It's authentic. It's you actually waking up in the middle of a culture designed to keep everyone asleep. The path forward isn't about forcing yourself to enjoy entertainment again. It's about discovering what genuine joy looks like for awakened consciousness. It's about building a life around presence, depth, authenticity, and real connection rather than constant stimulation and distraction. It's about trusting that your consciousness is reorganizing itself around truth rather than comfort, around reality rather than fantasy, around direct experience rather than second-hand narratives. And in time, you'll look back on this period of loss and recognize it for what it actually was. Not the death of joy, but the birth of discernment. Not the loss of pleasure, but the discovery of something far more satisfying than pleasure ever was. Not brokenness, but breakthrough. Not pathology, but transformation. Trust the process. Trust your consciousness. Trust that what's falling away needed to fall away so something truer could emerge. This is how awakening works. This is what it costs. And this is why so few people choose it, even though everyone says they want it. You're not broken. You're breaking through. Welcome to the other side of entertainment. Welcome to reality itself. And if you found this perspective valuable, if it helped you understand what you're experiencing, please subscribe to Alan Watts Insights for more content on the rarely discussed challenges of spiritual awakening. Your journey matters. Your transformation matters. And you're not alone in this.